Manchester United's pre-season campaign has officially started with a 1-0 loss to Rosenborg. And of course, social media is absolutely running with that. United lost to Rosenborg. They must be terrible. Ten Hag is terrible, etc. Let's make one thing very, very clear. The result could not be less important. It is the most irrelevant thing I've ever seen. The scoreline does not matter in this game. I would also make an argument that actually performance doesn't matter that much either, particularly at this stage in pre-season. This is the first game. This is largely about fitness, so I don't think individual performance is too important either. However, one thing I do think we can look at and can take from this game is the intent of the side, the intentions on the ball and off the ball, and also a couple of the shapes. So that is what we are going to discuss today. We are not going to talk about individual performance, although we might on one player. I'll get onto that later. We're going to look at what United looked to do on the ball and also what we looked to do off the ball. Was there anything different to what we were seeing last season? So, yeah. Starting with Manchester United on the ball, playing the ball out from the back, where early on, and for most part of the game to be fair, Rosenborg didn't exactly go for a high press. United did have spells where they could play out from the back. And the first thing that I think we noticed in this game was United's willingness to use a 2-4 shape, with Mason Mount and Casemiro both dropping deeper into a double pivot, with Wan-Bissaka and Murray pushing forward as the two fullbacks, in line with these two midfielders. Now, I guess the early kind of interesting thing here is that Mason Mount was used as the deeper midfielder. There has been a lot of discussion. Is he a Kobbie Mainoo backup or is he a Bruno Fernandes backup? This would suggest he is more in that kind of Kobbie Mainoo role rather than the Bruno Fernandes role higher up the pitch. So that is something interesting we saw early on. In terms of what else we saw in these areas, a lot of rotations. United moving into a lot of different positions, a lot of different areas of the pitch, but without ever really compromising the shape, which I actually quite liked from this United side. So one rotation that United used was moving to a back three. We would see Wan-Bissaka on the left-hand side drop deeper, and United would become a back three like this, with Murray allowed to push further forward. And when United done this, it quickly became a 3-2-5 shape. Hannibal would push into the right half space, Williams wide on the right-hand side, with Rashford coming in from the left. The 3-2-5 shape was quite apparent in this game. But even within this shape, there were still rotations, particularly down the left. I thought that Murray's positioning was quite interesting at times, because there were situations, let's say Mason Mount has the ball. Murray is going to make kind of a sprinting, darting run diagonally from this wider position into the inside channel. Now, the idea here isn't for him to actually get the ball, it's actually simply to create space and drag other players, so that Rashford could drop deeper and get on the ball. But as you would expect, in general, United were rotating a fair bit. But before we move to those kind of higher areas of the pitch, I do want to continue with this deeper phase. By the way, apologies for my voice. I'm still recovering from the final the other night. But yeah, rotations in this deeper phase, particularly with Casemiro, but also Vitek in goal. We saw a few interesting things because, whilst not all the time, for large parts of the game, there was this insistence on a back three shape in possession. Again, not always. It could become a 2-4 shape as well, as we've already seen. But there were a lot of situations where it was a back three. Now, this could be created, as we've seen here, but it could also change. Wan-Bissaka could push further forward, Williams could come inside, and what we saw was Casemiro actually dropping into the back three at times, outside of the centre-backs, or at times between the two centre-backs like this. Of course, when United done this, the idea was then for Hannibal to drop deeper to again make up the numbers in the middle of the pitch. And this is an important idea. The fact that, as much as possible, we were trying to get at least two midfielders present in the centre of the pitch. At times last season, particularly early on, we only saw one player in these areas. So again, I would say this is a good thing. The other interesting thing we saw, though, was the usage of the goalkeeper in the build-up phase. Because there were plenty of situations where he was all the way up here between the two centre-backs, acting essentially as a third centre-back on the ball. I thought this was an interesting idea from United, trying to overload the opposition. Of course, if you bring the goalkeeper out as your extra player, it means you don't have to drop Casemiro deep, which means that you can get the extra man in midfield. So this was interesting from United. It'll be interesting to see if when Onana comes into the team, if we see more of this, how well United use it. But again, it's just an observation and something that we can look at in future games. And then the other shape, I would say, with the goalkeeper, was United building with the back four, but with the keeper being one of the back four. So Johnny Evans would move to the left-hand side. Vitek's going to play kind of as like a left centre-back sort of position. Fish is going to move to right centre-back. He looked good, by the way. And then Wan-Bissaka is going to drop deeper. Now, again, in terms of how United actually executed from here, patterns of play, it's irrelevant. We'll see that develop over the coming weeks. But again, it was interesting to see this emphasis on using the goalkeeper on the ball. using the goalkeeper, making sure he's coming out into these areas and giving us that extra man. So that is an interesting concept, and it is definitely something to keep an eye on as we move into the rest of pre-season. Are United going to do this more? Again, particularly when Onana comes into the side, that is something to look at, because it also at times affected the role of Evans, because Evans could sometimes drop kind of left back. But there were also a couple of situations, few and far between, granted, but a couple of situations where he would move ahead of the ball into midfield. Murray would drop into left back. And again, the idea of this is it's allowing United to get that extra man in midfield. So you can kind of build with a 4 at the back, and then at times, let's switch this back out, then a 3 in midfield, and then you're allowing yourself to also build with this front 4 as well. So you're getting yourself a 4-3-4 shape, which normally isn't possible. Again, it's made possible by using the goalkeeper. In terms of once United were actually in this particular shape, I thought the positioning of the midfielders was good. Of course, we have now got a solo pivot rather than a double pivot. But still, United were close enough to each other. Our players were playing on different lines to each other, so Mount would drop a little bit deeper, kind of that connector role, whilst Hannibal was given the license to play a little bit higher. And again, this is now very much a midfield 3 rather than a 4-2-3-1. And again, we can't take into consideration the performance. It doesn't matter, right? The fitness levels don't allow you to perform. But it is interesting to see United playing in this way, getting players on different lines, staggered, allowing you to move the opposition, but also all being close to each other still, so that the player on the ball actually has an option. Now, again, in general, in terms of how United actually performed on the ball, it wasn't very good. There were instances where United were forced to play long. The question there would be, was that because technically they weren't sharp enough, or is that actually the intention moving forward? We don't know at this moment in time. Again, we'll see it kind of as we move forward into pre-season. But for now, I would say those are the main talking points in possession. I guess the final thing you could talk about was in the final third. Granted, United weren't here very often, to be fair. United didn't have much of the ball in this game. But when we're looking at a 3-2-5 shape, I guess the one observation would be, in terms of how it worked in the final third, entrances into the final third, it was quite a wide shape. What we saw at last season at times was the usage of minimum width, players coming close to each other, condensing the pitch. This was quite a wide approach. Now again, we can't take too much from this. It may have simply been because Rosenborg were narrow and compact, forcing us to play wide. But again, it is something to keep an eye on. In general though, in terms of on the ball, we didn't learn too much about United, apart from the usage of the goalkeeper in possession was fairly interesting.
So before we continue into the video, a quick shout out to today's video sponsor, JerseyFifa.com, the home of all of the greatest football kits. Whether that be the new latest releases or the old classic ones like this, Jersey FIFA has something for everyone, and now you can check it out yourself using the link in the description down below. And also make sure to use code JerseyFifa for 10% off when you order.
The next thing to look at is, of course, out of possession, and again, this is a really hard part of the game to gauge and really judge. This early into pre-season, you're not going to see an intense man-to-man press because the players physically aren't fit enough to do it. They can only play 45 minutes for starters, so you're not going to see an intense press, and we certainly didn't see that from United. Again, is that going to be intention moving forward? I'm not sure. What we did see was very much a 4-4-2 shape off the ball, with Hannibal being alongside Wheatley initially, and there was sort of an attempt, if you like, to use a passive piston press. The piston press being where the centre-back's got the ball, the near side player will go towards him, and this player will drop off. And then if the ball is to be moved across, the player will then move and drop like this. Now, it's not a bad thing to use for United, but in this game it was very, very passive. Very, very passive. So this player kind of responsible for moving towards the ball was incredibly slow, and this did create a few problems for United, because what it allowed Rosenborg to do was move the ball over to one side, drag United players over, and then either beat us simply because they were much sharper, or use the far side overload. So it looked a little bit like this. It's kind of been passive over here, but this is going to drag Williams out towards the fullback, and Casemiro is going to be dragged by this young man here, by the way, who was really bright, an interesting player to keep an eye on. But he was dragging Casemiro all over the shop, and it's interesting because in this moment, United almost look like they're man-to-man, but it's man-to-man without getting pressure high, which is something, of course, I'm not a big fan of at all. I have slated that in the past. So that is something to keep an eye on because it did cause a few problems. If Casemiro could then be beaten, which at times was too easy, but again, he's not fit, he's not sharp, it's fair enough. But obviously, that left United exposed. That did make it quite easy for Rosenborg to get at our goal, and they ended up having over 20 shots again. So that's kind of a theme from last season, which people are talking about. Yeah, in terms of the shape, I'm not a massive fan of it. Or I should say the approach within the shape. It isn't intense enough. And if you're not going to be intense with your forwards, then your midfielders shouldn't be going man-to-man. They should be marking space rather than players, and United didn't do that, which would be a slight concern. And I guess the other thing was just how easy it was to drag us over to one side of the pitch. So let's say we have been dragged over like this, and our players are going, again, in a sense, man-to-man on this side. It was easy, very easy, to drag all our players over here. And what it's done was left the far side switch. And when that switch is then played, you can see over on this side, you're now 3 versus 2, or in United's case, 2 versus 3, leaving United at a disadvantage, again, making it a bit too easy to kind of get at our goal. Again, the question is this just a lack of intensity? Would United normally be much more intense when it's over this side? We don't know. So, in terms of the shape of the ball, I really wouldn't take too much from it. Yes, a little bit concerning when you can see that many shots, and it did look very easy to play through us. But who knows, later in pre-season we might be much more intense. It really is difficult to find out too much from these out of possession positions and shapes. Keep an eye on it. Keep an eye on it, because it weren't great, but I wouldn't go overboard with the criticism just yet. And then just the last thing I quickly want to mention in this video is the performance of Toby Collier in the second half. Recently extended his contract and captained the side in the second half, and was probably United's best player apart from the goalkeeper. I thought he played really well on the ball and out of possession as well. Do you guys want a video breaking down his actions in this game, in the second half, what he brought to the side? If you do, let me know in the comments down below, because I thought he was our best outfield player, so perhaps that deserves some coverage. But you guys can decide, so let me know in the comments down below. Apart from that, we are finished for today. Of course, a weird game for United. You lose 1-0 to Rosenborg. It's a very mixed team. There's no emotion in it. There's no fitness in it, really. There's no massive tactical emphasis on the game, so there is only so much you can cover. Let me know what observations you made during the game, though. Is there anything that you saw in terms of shape and intention that I haven't mentioned today? If there is, again, let me know in the comments. But apart from that, we are finished. So thank you guys very much for watching. I hope you have enjoyed it. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.